From a tall window in a high room of King Claude's castle, the princess watched with wide eyes and trembling body the road her suitors had taken, to where it split into separate directions like a branching candlestick. Thag had followed the road to the right, Gallo the road to the left, and Jorn had travelled straight ahead. As far as the mysterious maiden's eyes could see, there was no cloud of dust on any road, no sign of horse or man. She watched the middle road with hope and eagerness, the roads that branched to right and left with terror and dismay. In his shadowy shop, Tocco sat quietly, trying to think of chill and fragile rhymes for time and sorrow. The royal wizard squatted on the floor of his room in a tower, trying to change a piece of common fieldstone into gold by wiggling his fingers at it and crying, "Eek! Sizzle!" Nothing happened. The royal physician, still lying in bed, insulting and reassuring himself, tried to stick out his tongue far enough to see whether or not it was coated. "Come, come," he said, "we can stick our tongue out farther than that, can't we?" he asked cheerily. "No, we can't," he replied sullenly. In the royal library, the royal recorder sat on a tall stool at a high desk and made an entry in his private diary. "On this day it has been established, despite the fussing and fretting and bawling and moaning of you-know-who, that the so-called princess we have been entertaining in the castle since the night before last is, in truth and fact, by birth and destiny, a common deer. The discovery of the sorrowful secret of the unhappy beast was made by me." King Claude sat all alone at the head of the long table in the banquet hall, cracking walnuts between his thumb and forefinger, and meditating on the advisability of taking a little wine before visiting the princess to acquaint her with her pitiful plight. He decided it would not be a good idea to call for wine, and went on cracking walnuts. As he turned the dilemma over in his mind, his eyes brightened and darkened and brightened and darkened. He cracked his last walnut and ate it slowly, shell and all, and slapped the table with his hand, and the silver bowl that had held the walnuts jumped off the table and cackled on the floor. "Steward!" bawled Claude. "Wine!" High up in a leafy tree where he could not be seen, Quando scanned the 3 roads that led to peril. By turning his head to the left and peering through the leaves, he could see the princess standing at the tall window in the high room. In the royal gamekeeper's lodge, the royal gamekeeper's wife rearranged crocks on a shelf, talking to the royal gamekeeper over her shoulder. "I don't believe a word of it. I don't care what you say. She never was a dear, if you ask me. They made the story up to cloak their goings-on. You men are all alike. Enchanted princess, indeed. Enchanted hussy. I know her kind. She loitered in the woods and waved at them." The royal gamekeeper's wife picked up a crock, rubbed it vigorously with a cloth, and set it down again. "Dainty, you insist she is? I say she's dirty. And as for being 21, she's nearer 30. The gamekeeper's wife wiped and wiped and wiped another crock. "That castle surely needs a woman's hand. It's full of broken glass and spider webs. Too bad her royal highness had to die, poor thing. I always say he struck her in his cups." She stepped back from the shelf and regarded her handiwork. "If she is a princess, then I've no doubt she's one of old King Puggy's daughters, eldest of the 7, I should say. She's pretty in their bold and brazen way. Well, what's the matter? Has the leopard got your tongue?" The royal gamekeeper did not answer. He was sitting in a chair, his hands folded on his stomach, fast asleep. The perilous labour of Prince Gallo. Prince Gallo's way led to the left and then to the right and then to the left again, and he came at last to a white path through a peaceful wood. As he jingled along the path, Gallo stared in amazement at a kind of forest he had never seen before. The trees were hung with signs and legends. "Lost babes found. Giants killed while you wait. 7 league boots, now $6.98. Let us waken your sleeping beauty. We put you on an urn, men put you on a pedestal. Consult panting and young. Seek Gallo even better than the true Grail. Coach pie, pumpkin wheels, horse traps, mice shoes. The sign that most interested the gaping Gallo read, "Visit the seven-headed dragon of Dragor, free, except moon days and fay days." As Gallo gazed about in wild wonder, a man wearing a silver cap and a garment made of brass saluted him. "Your parchments, brother," said the man in metal. "I am not your brother, and my name is Prince Gallo," said the perplexed prince. "In the forest of Will Be, all men are brothers," the man said. "This sounds friendly, but confusing," said Gallo. "I have no parchments, brother." The man looked grave for a moment, then closed one eye and spoke in a low voice. "You have the semblance of a gentleman of intelligence and wit," he said. "Now it just happens that I have an extra set of proper parchments that I will let you have for a song." "What song shall I sing?" said Gallo. "In the forest of Will Be, a song is 3 large emeralds." The man replied, "Have you 3 large emeralds?" From a sack on his saddle, Gallo extracted 3 emeralds and gave them to the man, who thereupon handed the prince a red parchment, a blue parchment, and a white parchment. "Give the red parchment to the man in white, the blue parchment to the man in red, and the white parchment to the man in blue," he said. "It's less simple that way for everybody." The man in metal touched a finger to his cap and walked away. Gallo rode along the edge of the woods until he came to another path, and he rode down the path until he came to a man in white. Gallo gave the man in white the red parchment. "Will you point me the way that leads to the 7-headed dragon of Dragor?" asked the prince. The man in white was staring at the red parchment. "This is not a true and proper parchment," said the man in white. "The seal is missing, the signature is doubtful, and the symbol is yesterday's." He was grave for a moment, then he closed one eye and spoke in a low voice. "You have the semblance of a gentleman of courage and nobility," he said. "You journey on a mission of high peril, or I am dressed in green. Now, I could tear this parchment up and let you pass, and make no cross for you there on that tree to show a knight has gone this way. But that's too safe for your discomfort and for mine. I'll change the seal and signature and symbol to make the parchment proper. And all this for a song, brother. All this for a song. It's more perilous that way for everybody." Prince Gallo sighed and gave the man 3 emeralds from his sack and rode on till he came to the man in blue. The man in blue took the white parchment and was grave for a moment. Then he closed one eye and spoke in a low voice. "You have the semblance of a man of learning and discernment, brother," he said. "But I can't let you pass until you prove your power to read. And how can you or I or anyone read this?" He gave the parchment back to Gallo, who saw that the writing on it could be read only by holding it up to a mirror. "I cannot read these words unless I have a looking-glass," Prince Gallo cried. The man in blue produced from his sleeve a silver and ivory mirror and handed it to the frowning prince. "Now read the legend in the glass," he said. Gallo tucked the parchment under his chin, held the mirror before him, and read, "Forget the past, enjoy the present. The future will take care of itself." Prince Gallo let the parchment drift to the ground. "I have a strange feeling that I am neither here nor there," he said, "and that this is neither now nor then. I am caught somewhere between the day before yesterday and the day after tomorrow." The man in blue looked grave for a moment. "That is because you have written out of the past into the future," he said. He closed one eye, In giving up was for will be, you have lost am. He spoke in a low voice. You have had the past, you behold the future about you, but you have no present. Now, it just happens that you hold in your hand a very fine present, a present of ivory and silver fit for a princess. Vulcan made it for Venus, who left it to Cleopatra, who gave it to Isolde, who bequeathed it to my grandmother. I will let you have it for a song. Prince Gallo sighed, drew 3 emeralds from his sack, and gave them to the man in blue. Which way to the 7-headed dragon of Dragor that guards the sacred sword of Lorelei? He asked patiently. Turn right, then right, then right, then right, said the man in blue. But that would take me around in a square and bring me back to where I am now, said Gallo. It's much more impressive that way for everybody, said the man in blue as he walked away, clicking his emeralds. The second son of Claude rode around the square of paths as he had been directed, and when he came back to where he had started from, he found a man in red waiting for him. Your blue parchment, said the man in red. Gallo handed him the parchment. Which way to the 7-headed dragon of Dragor that guards the sacred sword of Lorelei? The prince inquired. The man in red looked grave for a moment. Then he closed one eye and spoke in a low voice. You have the semblance of a gentleman of shrewdness and cunning, he said. Close your eyes, brother. Gallo closed his eyes, and the man in red concealed the blue parchment under a stone. Open your eyes, brother, he said, and Gallo opened his eyes. Do you see the blue parchment that I hold in my hand? Asked the man. No, you do not, for I have made it invisible. In the same manner I can make you and your horse invisible, so that you can ride up to the 7-headed dragon of Dragor and take the sacred sword of Lorelei without being seen. This service I will perform for 3 songs. Gallo took 9 emeralds from his sack, which left him only 12, and gave them to the man in red. You are invisible now, and neither man nor dragon can see you, said the other. It is more deceptive that way for everybody. Which way to the 7-headed dragon of Dragor? Demanded Gallo. The hard way, said the man in red. Down and down, round and round, through the moaning grove of Artemis. How shall I know this grove? Asked Gallo. By its red roses, and its million moons, and its blue houses, in each of which sits a solitary maiden moaning for her lover who is far away. Fear not the roaring of the dreadful Tarcomed, nor yet the wuffing puffing of the surly Nassilbuper, but ride straight on. And when I have passed through the grove, asked the prince, turn to the right, and follow a little white light, said the man in red, as he walked away, jiggling his emeralds. Gallo rode and rode till he came to the grove of Artemis. The scent of the red roses assailed his nostrils. The light of the million moons blinded his eyes, and the moaning of the lonely maidens deafened his ears, so that he galloped as fast as his horse could go until he came to a winding road and turned to the right. In front of him appeared suddenly a little white light, and he followed it round and round and down and down. Presently Prince Gallo heard the sound of many people talking and laughing and shouting and singing, and he saw tables along the side of the road spread with fruits and meats, and other tables piled with baubles and gewgaws and gimcracks and kickshaws, new to his sight and strange to his memory. On the trees hung heavy musical instruments he had never dreamed of, and the people were dressed in a remarkable fashion, and danced in a remarkable way down and down and round and round. Above the sounds of the people rose a curious and alarming buzzing and whirring and ringing and thumping. "Here you are, brother!" cried a man dressed in black and blue, and he held out 7 small spheres to Gallo. 7 balls for 12 emeralds. Try your luck." "You hand me these spheres," said Gallo in a puzzled tone, "yet you cannot see me, for I have been made invisible." "Of course I see you," said the man. "Plain as day, big as life, ugly as sin. Buy the balls and toss them in." "I do not understand what you're saying," said the bewildered prince. "Look, brother," said the man, 12 emeralds get you 7 balls. You throw the balls at the 7-headed dragon of Dragor in that striped tent yonder. The greatest mechanical wonder of the age, meaningless but marvelous. The 7 heads go round and round and down and down. Try your luck, try your skill. Toss a ball into each of the 7 heads, and you win the genuine and only sacred sword of Lorelei. A ball in 6, 2 golden bricks. 5 and dandy, a box of candy. 4, a key, and 3, a rose. And so it goes, and so it goes. The man gave the 7 balls to Gallo, and took his sack of emeralds. "You can't win, brother," he said, "and I can't lose. That makes it fair and square for everybody." He looked grave for a moment, then closed one eye and spoke in a low voice. "You have the semblance of a gentleman of honour and integrity," he said. "Now, if the great key in the side of the mechanical dragon is not wound, the 7 heads will not go round and round and down, and you can toss a ball into each of the 7 heads and win the sacred sword. In return for this little service and secret, I ask only for the golden saddle I see there on your horse." Gallo was so confused he could not say a word. He strode silently into the striped tent, and there he saw the 7-headed dragon, its heads now motionless, their mouths open. Between the claws of its great feet lay the glittering sword for which he had endured so much. One after another, Gallo tossed the balls until each had dropped into a separate gaping mouth. Then he walked over and picked up the sacred sword of Lorelei and left the striped tent. As he did so, a small, tired man appeared, walked to an iron chest, opened it, took out one of 100 identical swords, and placed it between the paws of the mechanical dragon. He yawned and shuffled away. Outside the striped tent, the man in black and blue waved gaily at Gallo as the prince mounted the bare back of his black horse and rode off swiftly the way he had come, up the winding road, past the little white light, through the grove of Artemis, and along the many paths, until at last he broke out of the forest of Wilby and galloped for the castle of his father, the sacred sword of Lorelei shining in his hand. The princess, standing at the tall window in the high room of King Claude's castle, strained her eyes and held her hand to her wild heart. She tried to pray, but since she had a memory of trees and fields, and a memory of nothing more, she found no prayer to say. The princess tried again to remember her name, and she could not. A black doubt crept into her mind and heart. Perhaps she was in truth a nameless waif, a woman of the fields or kitchen, changed into a deer by some woods or castle wizard whom she had unwittingly offended while milking a cow or serving broth. If so, it might have been the wicked wizard's whim to cast a spell that only a king's 3 sons in hot pursuit could break. Perhaps the sorcerer had laughed and said, "3 sons of a famous king will break your spell and break their hearts, and then your own. For who would have a milkmaid for his bride?" Perhaps the true disenchantment would come when the swiftest prince should place his trophy at her feet and cry, "I claim your heart and hand." Perhaps then she herself could and would confess, "My name is such and such, and I'm a peasant," or "My name is so-and-so, and I'm a scullery maid." She hoped, if this were to be the awful ending of her cruel enchantment, that Thag or Gallo and not Jawn, would be the first to cry, "I claim your heart and hand." But in spite of these dark thoughts, the eyes of the nameless maiden peered down the straight road Jawn had taken. Shadows lay across the road, spreading and thickening like black blood, but there was no sign of dust, no mark of horse or man. The princess forced herself to look to the left and then to the right. Nothing moved except the shadows of trees stirring in the wind along the road Gallo had taken. But the princess almost cried out when she saw what she thought was a cloud of dust on the road Thag had followed. It rose slowly above the trees, and she saw that it was only a swan flying. The princess placed her hands over her eyes and shivered. The perilous labour of Prince Jawn. The way to the cherry orchard lay straight and smooth as a legend for Prince Jawn, with only a small twist here and a little jog there. The sun shone warmly, the wind blew softly. A cock crowed and children called far away, and overhead the birds sang. In one place, a storm of paper cut in the fragilely beautiful designs of snowflakes blew dreamily across the road, and in another a wolf raised his head and howled, enabling Jawn to see that the creature wore a collar. The youngest son of King Claude rode sorrowfully on his mission in spite of his love for the princess, for he did not believe the labour set for him held perils worthy of his strength and courage. "Any child can pluck 1,000 cherries and place them in a silver chalice," he said aloud. "Any moon-crazed idiot could overthrow the artificial mockmock made of clay and sandalwood to frighten birds away. I would meet the blue boar face to face, or slay the dreadful dragon with the 7 heads. Set me a difficult riddle, a terrible task, a valiant knight to overthrow." As Prince Jawn ended his plaint, he heard a voice calling high and shrill. He looked all about him, but he could see no one, and still the voice kept crying, help me, Jawn, and you shall have a difficult riddle, a terrible task, and a valiant knight to overthrow. Help me, Jawn." The prince looked left and right and north and south and down and up, and when he looked up, he saw her, a witch caught on the highest branch of a tree, crying piteously, a witch hung high in the air like a smoky lantern. Prince Jawn dismounted and climbed the tree and lifted the witch from the highest branch and carried her safely to the ground. "I was riding the whirlwind," she said, "and got caught in the tree and lost my broom, and woe was me." Jawn looked all around and realized at last that the witch's broom must have fallen into a clump of tall plants called witch's broom because they look so much like a witch's broom. It took him a long time to find the witch's broom in the witch's broom, but he stumbled on it at last and returned it to its owner. "For your kindness, Prince Jawn," said the witch as she mounted her broom, "you shall have a difficult riddle to do, a terrible task to undergo, a valiant knight to overthrow." She waved her long bony fingers and sailed away, her shrill laughter trailing behind her. Jawn rode along the straight, smooth way until he came to where a sphinx crouched beside the road. "Name me a riddle, Sphinx," said Jawn. The stony eyes of the sphinx stared straight ahead, and its stony jaws did not move, but it spoke. "What is whirly? What is curly? Tell me, what is pearly early?" Jawn replied in a trice, "Gigs are whirly, cues are curly, and the dew is pearly early." He rode on a little way, and then rode back. "What was difficult about that riddle?" asked the prince. "It was difficult to say without moving my jaws," said the sphinx. Jawn shrugged his shoulders and continued on his way, until he came all of a sudden upon the great cherry orchard. He dismounted, unslung the silver chalice from his saddle, and strode into the orchard, the chalice in his left hand, his sword in his right. In a clearing in the middle of the cherry orchard lay the mockmock on its left side. The winds had blown it over, the rains had crumbled its clay, and the worms had eaten its sandalwood. The head of the mockmock had broken off in its fall, and larks nested in the hollow eyes. An enormous rock perched drowsily on the shattered monster's flank, and John drove it off with the point of his sword. Not far away, in a rusting suit of armour, lay the dusty bones of a knight who had died of terror in the days when the mockmock had been new and awful to look upon. John saw that the branches of all the trees hung close to the ground under the weight of the bright red fruit they bore, and he wondered that cherries could be so heavy. He dropped his sword in the grass. First with one hand and then with both, he tried to pull a cherry from its stem to put it in the silver chalice, and discovered that it was not a cherry at all, but a ruby in the shape of a cherry. All the cherries on all the trees were rubies, and none of them would come off the stems no matter how hard he tugged, and none of the stems would come off the branches. "You must count 1,000,000 to pick 1,000 cherries," said a voice behind John. And the prince turned to see a small man in a peaked cap looking at him, his large eyes twinkling. "Say 1, 2, 3, said the man. 1, 2, 3, said John. 4, 5, 6, said the man. 4, 5, 6, said John. And when he had counted rapidly up to 1,000, a ruby fell into the silver chalice. "But 1,000,000 is 1,000,000, said John, "and to count to 1,000,000 is a terrible task." "A terrible task you wished for, a terrible task you have," said the man. John counted to 1,000 again, and again a ruby fell into the chalice. 1, 2, 3, 4. "I came to pick cherries. 5, 6, 7, 8, and I find rubies. 9, 10, cried John. "Rubies, cherries, cherries, rubies," said the small man. "It is the same thing." 11, 12. "How is it the same thing?" asked John. 13, 14, 15, 16. The small man paced up and down and said, "What am I doing?" 17, 18, 19, 20. "You are walking back and forth," said John. 21. "But how can I walk back and forth without first walking forth and back?" "It is the same thing," said John. "A man who walks," 22, "forth and back," 23, "is walking back and forth," 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. "If forth and back are back and forth, then back is forth and forth is back," said the small one. "I do not see how that helps me in this terrible task," said John. He finished counting his 3,000, and a third cherry dropped into the silver chalice. "At this slow pace, Thag will ride home ahead of me with the golden tusks of the great boar, and Gallo will ride home ahead of me with the sacred sword of Lorelei, and one of them will marry the princess while I still count cherries into my chalice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The small man sat on the ground and looked at the prince, and listened as he counted to his 4,000, and the fourth cherry fell into the silver chalice. John began to count again. 50 princes in 50 years have come to this orchard to gather cherries or rubies for this princess or that," said the small man, "and not one of them has used logic in his labour. I am not a prince, and I cannot make the cherries fall, or the rubies, if you will. I have let the other 50 princes pluck the fruit or the jewels their own way, because it is worth counting to 1,000,000 for the heart and hand of a lovely lady. With you, my friend, we have this Thag to think of, and this Gallo. There is a logical secret to the falling of the cherries. I cannot tell it outright, but I can ask you questions. 348, 349, 350, said John. What questions would you ask? Does a cherry drop when you say 99? No. Does a ruby fall when you say 999? No. When does a cherry or a ruby fall? 351. When I say 1,000, said John. A ruby dropped into his silver chalice. 1,000, cried John again, and another ruby fell. 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, cried John, and 4 more rubies fell into the chalice. In no time at all, or to be exact, in 1,000th the time it would have taken him to count to 1,000,000 by ones, John had filled the chalice with 1,000 rubies. He looked around to thank the small man in the peaked cap, but he was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there stood before John a knight in black armor, the tallest and strongest black knight that the young prince had ever seen. "Name me your name, Black Knight," cried John. "I am Duff of the Dolorous Doom," thundered a great voice under the gleaming casque, which covered all save the dark eyes of the Black Knight. 50 princes have I fought beneath these trees, and lived to tell the tale. John put down the silver chalice and picked up his sword. "I am armored all in steel. Sets not the balance in my favor?" rumbled the Black Knight. John raised his sword. The Black Knight kept his own sword at his side. "There's magic here, I warn you, Prince. What's mightier than magic?" "Miracle." "What's miracle?" asked the Black Knight. "Love's miracle enough." "Armor, Prince, is stronger stuff." The Black Knight raised his sword swiftly, and steel rang against steel. Duff swung his sword above his head with both hands as a man swings an axe, and brought it down so savagely that it whined in the air. But John stepped quickly to one side and thrust at a chink he detected in the Black Knight's armor, just under the right shoulder. Duff brought up his sword barely in time to strike John's sword away. Time and again he lunged and swung and thrust, and time and again John parried the lunges and sidestepped the swinging steel, stabbing at the chink in Duff's armor whenever it gaped open. Once, when a lightning thrust threw John off balance, the Black Knight would have cleft his head to his chin had he not in turn been thrown off balance by stumbling against the chalice of rubies, scattering them in the green grass. The battle surged and circled in and out among the trees with a great ringing and flashing of steel. The point of John's sword struck like a bright snake at the chink in the Black Knight's armor, which opened and closed like a small mouth as he lunged and drew back and lunged again. The Black Knight began to breathe harder and harder. His thrusts were slower and slower, and he no longer lifted the sword high over his head for the cruel slashing strokes which in the first hour of the battle had fallen close to John's body. At last the Black Knight raised his sword above his head with both hands for a stroke that would cut the young prince in two like an apple, and swift as light John's sword darted for the chink under the right shoulder. His sword point cut deep, and the Black Knight's weapon fell to the ground. His right arm swung uselessly by his side like a pendulum. The massive figure in black steel staggered and fell to the grass with a great clangor. The casque that had hidden all save the dark eyes of the Black Knight was wrenched loose and rolled over and over, stopping with a clank against the silver chalice. Prince John saw to his amazement and horror that the head and face revealed to him were the head and face of a man of 70 years. John knelt beside his fallen foe in sorrow and regret, and held the knight's head in his arms. "I would not have fought so venerable a knight had I known," said John. "You fought the fearful thing I seem to be, and that's the test and proof of valor. That's the proof and test. When all is dark within the house, who knows the monster from the mouse?" The Black Knight's voice no longer thundered, but was small and thin. John helped the old man to his feet, and staunched the blood and bound his wound. "What may I trust?" cried John. "What's there to trust. Ah, trust your heart, the old man said. Trust love. 50 years ago, I undertook a fearful labor for a lady's love. Armored all in pride and arrogance, I sought to meet the dreadful mockmock face to face, and came upon this harmless thing of wood and clay. Then love's a whim, I cried, and man's a fool. The peril and the labor, Prince, lie not in dreadful monsters or in mighty deeds, but in the keeping of the heart a man has won. This is the dolorous doom of one who rode not home to claim his lady's hand, that each and every Maytime till I die, I must be overthrown by love which once I overthrew. John was silent for a little space, and then he said, One of your brothers, then, came back with golden tusks or a silver sword, and won the lady's hand. The old man shivered inside his armour. She never wed, but sat with owls by day and cats by night, peering far and near and crying, Hark! Her true love came in every form, in dust and wind and roses. Her voice grew high and shrill and wild and wilder, and in the end she brewed an evil brew of mice and woad and cockatrice and rue, and over this she cast a spell in metaphor. The steel I wear is strength, the flaw therein is pride. Thunder how I will, I'm never safe inside. The old knight blinked away a tear. Men see her once in every Maytime, swinging like a smoky lantern in a tree. Ride swiftly, Prince, and love ride with you. The young prince watched the aged knight in silence and heard him out. She named you valiant, was all that John could say, and placed the crevice in your armour not too near the heart. There was a deeper moaning from the armour as the figure of Duff of the Dolorous Doom clanked slowly away and was lost among the trees. Prince John hurriedly refilled the chalice with the scattered rubies, and a moment later he was riding swiftly for the castle of his father, the silver chalice shining in his hand.